In a dim New York kitchen, long before dawn, someone was already stirring a pot. Not pasta with meatballs, not restaurant Italian, but cornmeal, and wild greens, and yesterday's bread. Because the foods Italian immigrants actually ate in early 1900s America weren't the dishes we celebrate today. They were meals of survival. Salted fish that could last months. Wine made secretly in basements. Foraged weeds gathered beside railroad tracks. Cheese made in crowded tenement rooms. These were the tastes of villages left behind, and the reality of starting over with almost nothing. Tonight, we step into the kitchens of Ellis Island families, into streets of Little Italy before electricity, into a world where every crust mattered, and every recipe carried memory. These are the foods that built Italian-American life, one humble bowl at a time. Number 1. Polenta as a daily bread substitute. Before the sun reached the narrow windows of crowded tenement blocks, before factory whistles called men into the streets, there was already a pot on the fire. Inside it, not wheat, not bread, but cornmeal. For many northern Italian immigrants arriving in America around 1900, polenta was not a dish of nostalgia. It was a continuation of hardship. In regions like Veneto and Lombardy, generations had survived on little more than boiled cornmeal. Wheat flour was expensive, bread was scarce, and polenta became the daily staple of the rural poor. When families crossed the Atlantic in search of opportunity, they carried recipes in memory, but also poverty and habit. And so in American cities, in places like New York's Mulberry Bend or Boston's North End, the same familiar ritual continued. A mother or grandmother would pour coarse cornmeal slowly into boiling salted water, stirring with a wooden spoon for nearly an hour. The mixture thickened into a dense golden mass, filling, cheap, and capable of feeding many mouths. There were no plates to spare. Polenta was spread onto wooden boards or cloth-covered tables. Children and adults gathered around with spoons. Everyone ate from the same surface. To outsiders, this seemed primitive, even embarrassing. Many Italian immigrants themselves associated polenta with the hunger they hoped to escape. In Italy, to be called a polentone meant you were poor, rural, unsophisticated. And yet in America, the meaning quietly shifted. Because here, polenta was not only memory of deprivation. It was proof of survival. Cornmeal was inexpensive in the United States and widely available. A few cents could produce a meal large enough for an entire family after a day of labor in construction, docks, or garment factories. Compared to uncertain wages and overcrowded housing, the predictability of polenta offered a strange comfort, a food that never failed. Sometimes it was eaten plain. Sometimes with milk if a family could afford it. On better days, a bit of tomato sauce or cheese appeared on top, a small celebration. Over time, something unexpected happened. Children who grew up in America began to remember polenta differently than their parents. For them, it was not shame, it was childhood. It was warmth. It was evenings gathered close in dim kitchens. It was the taste of home before they ever knew another. Today, polenta appears in restaurants, grilled or creamed, paired with meats and truffles, praised as rustic cuisine. But its immigrant past was far humbler, a pot that stretched hope across too many plates. Because for the first Italian families in America, polenta was not a side dish. It was bread. It was dinner. It was endurance made edible. And if cornmeal could sustain a family across oceans and hardship, then the next foods they carried would sustain something deeper still. Number 2. Ribollita and bread-stretching soups. In kitchens where nothing could be wasted, where yesterday's crust might decide tomorrow's hunger, bread was never thrown away. It simply became soup. Among Italian immigrants from Tuscany and central regions, ribollita, literally reboiled, was less a recipe than a practice of survival. In the villages they left behind, stale bread was a daily reality. Wheat loaves hardened quickly, and poverty demanded ingenuity. So families simmered old bread with beans, cabbage, onions, and whatever vegetables were available, then reheated the pot again and again across several days. When these same families arrived in America's tenement districts, the ritual followed them intact. In cramped apartments, with coal stoves and limited money, fresh bread was still precious. But stale bread? That was opportunity. A mother might save crusts in a cloth sack for days, waiting until enough had accumulated. Then came the pot, often the largest object in the household, filled with beans, scraps of greens from street markets, and water stretched carefully into broth. The bread went in last, dissolving slowly into thickness. Ribollita did something extraordinary for poor families. It multiplied food. A handful of beans could feed many. A single cabbage could stretch across days. And bread, that might have been inedible alone, became substance again. Neighbors recognized the smell instantly, earthy, vegetal, comforting. In buildings packed with immigrant families, one simmering pot could scent an entire stairwell. Children carried bowls between apartments. Relatives shared ladles across doorways. Hunger was private, but soup was communal. To American observers of the time, such dishes looked coarse and peasant-like. Newspapers described immigrant foods as garlic-laden stews or vegetable slops. But within Italian households, ribollita held dignity. It was continuity, the same meal grandparents had eaten centuries earlier in stone villages. And in America, it gained new meaning. Because here, reboiling was not only thrift, it was defiance. Each reheating meant another day fed, another night endured, another step away from starvation. Today, ribollita appears in cookbooks as hearty Tuscan comfort food, drizzled with olive oil and served in ceramic bowls. But in the immigrant years, it was eaten from chipped dishes, often standing, often quickly, between shifts of labor. Still, it filled stomachs and carried memory. Bread, once hardened, softened again. Life, once broken, held together. And in the next kitchens down the street, another transformation was quietly fermenting below the floorboards. Number 3. Basement fermented homemade wine. Beneath city streets, below the noise of carts and factories, Italian immigrants were making wine. In Italy, wine was not luxury. It was daily nourishment, safer than water in many rural areas, consumed by adults and children alike, diluted or strong depending on means. To drink wine with meals was as natural as bread itself. So when immigrants reached America and discovered a culture suspicious of alcohol, and soon, laws restricting it, the absence of wine felt unnatural. A meal without it seemed incomplete, almost foreign. And so they recreated it. By the early 1900s, shipments of grapes from California began arriving in eastern cities each autumn. Italian neighborhoods buzzed with anticipation. Families purchased crates collectively, hauling them down narrow staircases into basements and cellars. There, the old methods returned. Grapes were crushed by hand or foot in tubs. Juice flowed into barrels salvaged from factories or cooperages. Fermentation began naturally, filling underground rooms with the sweet sharp smell of transformation. Children watched, elders supervised, and knowledge passed without written instruction, only memory. For immigrant men who labored long hours in construction or docks, this ritual mattered deeply. Making wine restored agency. It preserved heritage. It recreated a piece of the homeland in a place that often rejected them. Then came Prohibition. From 1920 onward, commercial alcohol vanished, but immigrant wine did not. Loopholes allowed limited home production, and Italian Americans used them fully. Basements across cities continued fermenting quietly, barrels hidden behind coal piles or laundry lines. Wine at the table meant normalcy. It meant continuity. It meant Italy survived in America. To outsiders, such practices were sometimes mocked as unsanitary or foreign. But within families, the first taste of new wine each year carried ceremony. Glasses raised, blessings spoken, ancestors remembered. Today, homemade wine has become hobby or artisanal craft. But in immigrant basements, it was necessity of identity, a liquid thread connecting continents. And if grapes could travel across an ocean to become wine again, so too could fish travel across oceans to become feast. Number 4. Bacala for Fridays and Christmas Eve. Long before refrigeration, before supermarkets, there was fish that never spoiled. Bacala, salted, dried cod, arrived in Italian immigrant homes stiff as wood and pale as bone. It came wrapped in paper or burlap from import shops in Little Italy districts, often hanging from hooks or stacked like planks. To the unfamiliar eye, it hardly looked edible. But to Italians, it was tradition. In Catholic practice, Fridays and certain holy days required abstaining from meat. In coastal Italy, fresh fish served this purpose. But inland and poor communities relied on preserved cod, durable, transportable, and capable of lasting months without decay. Immigrants carried this habit intact to America. Even in poverty, families made certain that bacala appeared for major observances, especially Christmas Eve, the vigil meal before celebration. Preparations began days earlier. The rock-hard fish had to be soaked repeatedly, water changed again and again, until flesh softened and salt receded. Then came cooking. Some stewed it in tomato sauce with garlic and oil. Others fried it lightly. Some mixed it with potatoes into simple cakes. The aroma was unmistakable, strong, maritime, ancient. Tenement hallways filled with it each December, announcing feast before sight. Children recognized it instantly. Christmas was coming. What made bacala remarkable was not luxury but persistence. Even families struggling to afford rent prioritized this dish for sacred days. It connected ritual across continents, the same fish eaten in Sicilian villages, Neapolitan ports, and now New York apartments. To American neighbors unfamiliar with salted fish, the smell could seem overwhelming. Newspapers of the era joked about foreign odors during immigrant holidays. Yet for Italian families, that scent meant belonging. It meant faith intact despite displacement. Today, bacala survives mostly in specialty cuisine and holiday nostalgia. But in the immigrant era, it was spiritual anchor, proof that even in new lands, sacred rhythms continued. Because on Christmas Eve in Little Italy, while snow fell outside and poverty pressed close, the same fish eaten for centuries in Italy still reached the table. And beyond the tenements and empty city lots, another ancient food waited to be gathered by hand. Number 5. Foraged dandelion greens from vacant lots. Before markets opened, before carts rolled in with vegetables, Italian immigrants were already gathering greens. Not from farms, not from shops, but from the margins of the city itself. In rural Italy, especially in the south, wild foraging had always supplemented meager diets. Peasant families knew edible plants by season and terrain: chicory along roadsides, wild fennel in fields, dandelion leaves pushing through stones. These greens were free, abundant, and nutritionally vital in diets otherwise dominated by grains and bread. When immigrants arrived in American cities, they did not abandon this knowledge. They adapted it. Vacant lots between buildings, railway embankments, riverbanks, and undeveloped land became new foraging grounds. At dawn, women and children walked with baskets or cloth sacks, scanning the ground with practiced eyes. They sought the jagged leaves of dandelion, bitter, resilient, unmistakable. To outsiders, This behavior seemed strange, even desperate. Newspapers occasionally described immigrants picking weeds. But within Italian communities, these greens were not weeds at all. They were cicoria, the taste of home. Back in tenement kitchens, the greens were washed carefully to remove city grit, then boiled or sautéed with garlic and precious drops of olive oil. Sometimes beans joined them, sometimes bread. The bitterness, once softened by cooking, became deeply familiar, a flavor associated with spring, renewal, and survival. Foraging in America carried emotional weight beyond nutrition. It recreated a direct relationship with land that immigrants feared losing. Even in crowded cities, they could still recognize edible life pushing through soil. Knowledge carried across oceans remained valid. Children learned plant names in Italian dialects while kneeling in American dirt. Grandmothers pointed and instructed, this one good, this one not. Cultural memory rooted itself again in new ground. Today, dandelion greens appear in farmers' markets and gourmet recipes, celebrated as rustic or artisanal. But for immigrants, they were simply necessary, vitamins gathered without money. Because when wages were uncertain and vegetables costly, the earth still offered something free. And while some families gathered greens above ground, others found nourishment in the cheapest cuts below the butcher's counter. Number 6. Street-sold macaroni with tomato sauce. In the clang of docks, in the dust of construction sites, there was a food you could eat standing. Hot, cheap, filling. Macaroni. Long before Italian restaurants dotted American cities, before spaghetti became national comfort food, pasta existed primarily as street sustenance within immigrant neighborhoods. Italian vendors, often recent arrivals themselves, sold cooked macaroni from carts or barrels along busy labor routes. For a few coins, a worker received a paper cone or tin plate filled with pasta coated in tomato sauce. No utensils required. Fingers or small forks sufficed. It was fast, portable, and deeply familiar to men far from home. Many immigrants, especially from southern Italy, had grown up eating dried pasta regularly. Unlike fresh bread, pasta stored well and cooked quickly in large batches. In America, where labor hours were long and meals irregular, this quality became invaluable. Street macaroni solved a problem: how to feed workers cheaply and immediately. The sauce was simple: tomatoes, garlic, sometimes oil. Meat was rare, reserved for Sundays or feast days. Yet even without richness, the dish satisfied. Carbohydrates provided energy, warmth comforted, flavor restored memory. American observers initially viewed this food with curiosity or disdain. Early 1900s accounts describe Italians eating strings of paste from street stalls. The act of consuming pasta publicly seemed foreign to Anglo-American norms of dining. But within immigrant communities, these vendors became essential infrastructure. They fed dock workers unloading ships, laborers digging subway tunnels, and pushcart sellers working dawn to dusk. Macaroni was fuel for building American cities. Over time, something subtle shifted. Non-Italians began tasting it. Curiosity turned to acceptance. Acceptance to popularity. The same street macaroni once mocked would eventually evolve into one of America's most beloved cuisines. Yet in its earliest form, it remained humble. Pasta, tomato, heat, and necessity. Today we picture pasta in restaurants with linens and wine. But for the first Italian Americans, it was eaten on sidewalks, steam rising in cold air between shifts of exhausting work. And while pasta filled stomachs above street level, another cherished dish simmered slowly inside immigrant homes, made from cuts others refused. Number 7. Tripe stewed in tomato trippa. In butcher shops of immigrant neighborhoods, there was always a second counter. Not for prime cuts, not for steaks, but for what remained. Tripe, the lining of a cow's stomach, sat pale and folded, inexpensive and often ignored by mainstream American buyers. Yet for Italian immigrants, it was familiar territory. In many regions of Italy, especially among the poor, animal slaughter meant using everything edible. Organ meats were not undesirable, they were essential. So tripe crossed the Atlantic as culinary memory. Purchased cheaply, it required patience. The tough flesh had to be cleaned, boiled, and simmered for hours before becoming tender. In immigrant kitchens, pots of tripe bubbled slowly with tomatoes, onions, and herbs, transforming humble offal into deeply flavored stew. The smell was unmistakable, rich, earthy, slightly gamey. For those raised with it, the aroma promised comfort. For outsiders, it seemed strange. Early American descriptions labeled such dishes strong or peculiar, reinforcing cultural distance. But within Italian households, tripe carried dignity. It represented thrift, skill, and respect for food. Nothing from an animal should be wasted. Nourishment required ingenuity. For poor families, tripe offered rare protein at minimal cost. A single purchase could feed many when stretched with sauce and bread. Sunday meals often featured it, not as luxury, but as the best available. Preparation itself became ritual. Older women passed down cleaning techniques. Seasoning choices reflected regional identity. Florentine style, Roman style, Southern variations, Italy's diversity persisted in American pots. Today, tripe survives mostly in specialty restaurants or heritage cooking, often considered adventurous cuisine. Yet for immigrants, it was ordinary sustenance, as common as stew, as normal as soup. Because survival cooking transforms perception. What others discard becomes treasure. And as tripe simmered inside kitchens, winter streets outside filled with another scent from the old world. Sweet, smoky, and carried on cold air. Number 8. Roasted chestnuts from pushcarts. On winter streets, when breath turned visible in the air, a familiar scent drifted through immigrant neighborhoods. Sweet, smoky, comforting. Roasted chestnuts. In many parts of Italy, chestnuts had long served as a staple of mountain and rural diets. Ground into flour, boiled into soups, or eaten roasted, they sustained communities where wheat could not grow easily. For immigrants arriving in America, especially from northern and central regions, the taste of chestnuts carried deep seasonal memory. And so the tradition crossed the ocean. Italian street vendors set up pushcarts in cold months, small braziers glowing with coals. Fresh chestnuts tumbled and cracked in perforated pans, their shells splitting open with soft pops. The aroma traveled far, cutting through coal smoke and city odor, guiding passers-by by scent alone. Customers approached not only for food, but for familiarity. A paper cone of hot chestnuts warmed hands as much as stomach. Children peeled them carefully, steam rising from pale flesh. Adults ate slowly, savoring a winter ritual unchanged from villages thousands of miles away. For vendors, chestnuts offered livelihood. Seasonal sales supplemented meager incomes. Knowledge of roasting technique passed from generation to generation. For buyers, they offered something rarer: continuity. American observers soon associated roasted chestnuts with Italian neighborhoods and winter streets. The image entered holiday culture, later immortalized in song. Yet behind that nostalgia stood immigrant labor and adaptation. Because these were not decorative treats. They were working-class food. Cheap, filling, portable, and warming, ideal for laborers outdoors in cold weather. A handful could sustain hours of work. In an era before widespread street snacks, chestnuts were practical nourishment. Today, roasted chestnuts evoke holiday romance. But in immigrant America, they were daily survival wrapped in warmth, a taste that proved traditions could endure even in foreign winters. And alongside chestnut sweetness, Another preserved taste from the sea anchored meals indoors. Number 9. Anchovies and oil-cured fish on bread. In kitchens with little meat, with vegetables stretched thin, flavor sometimes came from a tin. Anchovies. Small, salted, intensely aromatic fish packed in oil or brine traveled easily across oceans and into immigrant homes. In Italy, anchovies had long been culinary amplifiers, a way to bring depth to otherwise simple dishes. A single fish could transform a pot of greens or a slice of bread. Italian immigrants preserved this habit in America. In tenement pantries, tins of anchovies sat beside beans and pasta. When meals seemed too plain, bread, boiled vegetables, or soup, a fillet dissolved into oil created richness disproportionate to cost. Garlic, anchovy, and olive oil formed a trinity of flavor that required no expensive ingredients. Sometimes anchovies were mashed into spreads for bread. Sometimes melted into sauces. Sometimes eaten whole with crusts. To outsiders unfamiliar with such intensity, the smell seemed overpowering. But for immigrants, it signaled Mediterranean identity. It tasted like coasts and sun and fishing villages left behind. Economically, preserved fish made sense. Fresh fish was costly and perishable in urban environments without refrigeration. Anchovies lasted months and delivered protein and salt, essential nutrients for laboring bodies. Culturally, they carried continuity. Recipes using anchovies dated back centuries in Italian cooking. Even when other ingredients changed in America, this small fish kept dishes recognizable. Today, anchovies remain divisive, beloved by some, avoided by others. Yet their immigrant history reveals them not as garnish, but as lifeline, concentrated nourishment and memory in tiny form. Because in households where meat was rare, one salted fish could season an entire meal. And in those same kitchens, milk delivered each morning became something new again. Number 10. Homemade ricotta in tenement kitchens. At dawn, milk arrived. Glass bottles left at doorsteps or carried up stairwells entered Italian immigrant homes not only as drink, but as possibility. Because for families accustomed to making fresh cheeses in Italy, milk was not an end product, it was raw material. Ricotta. In villages across Italy, cheese making had been routine. Whey from other cheeses was reheated to produce ricotta, soft, mild, versatile. Immigrants lacked farms and animals in America, but they did not abandon the skill. Instead, they adapted. Using delivered cow's milk, families heated pots gently on coal stoves, adding acid, lemon juice or vinegar to separate curds. The transformation felt almost magical, liquid turning to cloud-like solids. Curds were gathered in cloth, drained, and within hours, fresh ricotta emerged in cramped tenement kitchens. Space was limited. Equipment improvised. But knowledge persisted. Ricotta served many roles. Spread on bread, mixed into pasta fillings, sweetened for desserts, or eaten plain, it provided protein and richness rarely accessible otherwise. Compared to store-bought cheese, homemade ricotta was cheaper and fresher. The act of making it also mattered culturally. It connected women, especially to rural traditions disrupted by migration. Skills learned from mothers in Italy found new expression in American apartments. Foodways survived through practice. Neighbors sometimes shared milk or techniques. Recipes crossed regional lines within immigrant communities. Cheese making became quiet cultural preservation. Today, ricotta is widely available commercially. Yet handmade versions remain prized for texture and flavor, echoing immigrant methods. What was once necessity has become artisanal craft. But in early Italian-American life, ricotta was not specialty. It was resilience, turning ordinary milk into sustaining food through inherited knowledge. Because even in crowded cities, traditions could be remade by hand. And among those traditions, One humble bean carried centuries of meaning across oceans. Number 11. Fava bean stews and luck charms. In pockets and pots. In soup and symbol. There was a bean Italians never forgot. Fava. Broad, pale green, ancient, fava beans had sustained Mediterranean people since antiquity. In Italy, they carried dual meaning, staple food of the poor and emblem of survival. During famines, when other crops failed, fava beans endured, feeding communities through hardship. Immigrants carried both uses to America. Dried fava beans appeared in markets serving Italian neighborhoods, affordable and long-lasting. Soaked overnight and simmered slowly, they formed hearty stews enriched with garlic, oil, or greens. Like lentils or chickpeas, they stretched across meals, nourishing families on limited budgets. But beyond nutrition, fava beans held symbolism. Many immigrants kept a single dried bean in wallets or pockets as a talisman of good fortune, echoing Italian folklore that credited the bean with averting starvation. To carry one meant remembering ancestors who survived scarcity. On certain feast days, fava dishes appeared deliberately, linking ritual to sustenance. Eating them acknowledged both past hunger and present hope. American observers sometimes misunderstood this attachment. Beans were common across cultures, yet fava beans specifically seemed foreign. Their strong flavor and firm texture differed from local varieties. But within Italian homes, they tasted unmistakably of heritage. Today, fava beans appear seasonally in specialty cuisine. Their immigrant role is less remembered: cheap protein, cultural symbol, and edible history. Because for those who crossed oceans with little, this bean meant they had endured before, and would endure again. And endurance in immigrant kitchens also meant transformation, turning the simplest dough into the food that would one day define Italian America. Number 12. Early Little Italy pizza, tomato flatbread. Before neon signs, before delivery boxes, pizza was street bread. In the Naples and southern Italian towns many immigrants left behind, pizza had never been restaurant fare. It was working food, flat dough baked quickly, topped simply, sold cheaply to laborers. When Neapolitan immigrants settled in American cities, they brought this habit intact. In early Little Italy neighborhoods, small bakeries or communal ovens produced round or rectangular flatbreads brushed with tomato, oil, and occasionally garlic. Cheese was scarce and expensive. Many versions had none. The result was closer to focaccia or marinara pizza than modern pies. Workers bought slices folded or whole rounds to share. Children ate it as snack. It was portable, filling, and affordable, ideal urban sustenance. American observers initially saw pizza as ethnic curiosity. Newspapers described Italians eating tomato pies in crowded districts. Outside those neighborhoods, few encountered it. For decades, pizza remained largely within immigrant communities. Yet its qualities made it inevitable. Cheap ingredients, fast cooking, satisfying flavor. As Italian Americans moved outward and interacted more with broader society, pizza traveled too. By mid-20th century, it would explode into national obsession. But its immigrant beginnings remained humble. For first-generation families, pizza tasted like southern Italy streets, open-air ovens, bustling markets, shared meals. Eating it in America restored sensory memory of home. Today, pizza symbolizes Italian-American cuisine globally. Yet its earliest American form was spare. Dough, tomato, heat, survival food turned icon. Because what begins as necessity sometimes becomes identity. And in those same neighborhoods, another soup simmered quietly, combining greens and beans into nourishment that crossed centuries. Number 13. Escarole and bean soup, wedding soup, roots. In pots large enough for many. Greens wilted into broth. Beans softened slowly. Escarole and beans. Across southern Italy, combinations of bitter greens and legumes formed everyday sustenance. Protein from beans, vitamins from greens, flavor from garlic and oil, a complete meal without meat. Immigrants carried this formula unchanged into American kitchens. Escarole, related to endive, became available in urban markets serving Italian districts. Its sturdy leaves held up to long simmering. Combined with white beans and sometimes small scraps of pork or bone, it produced hearty soup capable of feeding entire families. This dish stood at the root of what Americans later called Italian wedding soup. The name did not originally refer to marriage ceremonies, but to the marriage of greens and meat or beans, ingredients joined harmoniously. Over time in America, meatballs were added and the dish evolved. But its immigrant base remained escarole and legumes. Economically, the soup made sense. Beans were cheap, greens moderate in cost, meat optional. A single pot lasted days. Like ribollita, it exemplified stretching ingredients without sacrificing nourishment. Culturally, escarole soup reinforced continuity. Italians from various regions recognized similar preparations, allowing diverse immigrant groups to share common food language in America. To outsiders, the bitterness of escarole seemed unusual. But for Italians, bitterness balanced richness, a valued flavor profile rarely present in Anglo-American cuisine of the time. Today, Italian wedding soup often appears in restaurants with meatballs and pasta. Yet its immigrant ancestor was simpler, quieter: greens, beans, broth, sustenance born of necessity. Because in early Italian-American homes, marriage meant not ceremony, but ingredients bound together to survive. And as these soups nourished bodies, another ingredient, precious and scarce, was used drop by drop to flavor them all. Number 14. Carefully rationed olive oil. In the corner of many immigrant kitchens, there was a bottle kept almost sacred: olive oil. In Italy, olive oil was not exotic, it was daily life. Pressed from groves that families had known for generations, it flavored everything from bread to vegetables to fish. But in early 1900s America, olive oil was neither common nor cheap. Imported across oceans, sold in specialty shops, and purchased by immigrants with limited income, it became precious. So it was used carefully. A spoonful drizzled over soup just before serving. A few drops rubbed onto bread with garlic. A thin sheen on cooked greens. Unlike modern cooking where oil might be poured freely into pans, immigrant households treated it almost medicinally, flavor concentrated, rationed, respected. Frying in olive oil was rare. Cheaper lard or animal fat handled that task. Olive oil remained finishing essence, taste of homeland preserved in liquid form. Children learned quickly: do not waste. Bread wiped plates to capture every trace. Empty bottles were saved, refilled when possible. The oil also carried symbolism. It linked families to Mediterranean identity, something distinctly Italian in a country where butter dominated cooking. Its aroma alone evoked villages and harvest seasons far away. American observers sometimes associated olive oil with immigrant difference, even suspicion. Early advertisements in the U.S. marketed it as medicinal tonic rather than cooking fat. But for Italians, it was simply essential, the flavor that made food recognizable. Today, olive oil fills supermarket aisles and celebrity kitchens. Its health benefits praised, its varieties celebrated. Yet for immigrant families, it was once luxury measured in teaspoons. Because even in poverty, taste mattered, memory mattered, and a single drop could transform a meal. And when that oil met dough and cheese, it created one of the few sweets many immigrant families knew. Number 15. Holiday cannoli made once a year. All year, there was little sugar, little butter, little cream, little indulgence. But once, perhaps twice, there were cannoli. For many Italian immigrants, sweets were rare luxuries. Daily life revolved around sustenance, not dessert. Ingredients required for pastries: refined sugar, ricotta in quantity, flour for delicate shells, oil for frying, cost money few families could spare regularly. So pastries became ritual. Cannoli, with their crisp fried tubes filled with sweetened ricotta, were tied to feast days in Sicily and southern Italy. Immigrants preserved this tradition in America. Weddings, saints' days, Christmas, Easter, these moments justified expense and effort. Preparation was communal and deliberate. Dough rolled thin on worn tables. Shells wrapped around metal forms, and fried carefully in hot fat. Ricotta strained to proper dryness, mixed with sugar saved over weeks, perhaps flavored with citrus or chocolate if available. Children watched eagerly, knowing this was exceptional. Adults too understood. Sweetness marked celebration. In neighborhoods where poverty dominated, cannoli signaled joy breaking through hardship. Their presence meant abundance, however temporary. Guests received them as honor. Sharing them expressed generosity. American bakeries eventually adopted and popularized cannoli, transforming them into everyday pastries. But in immigrant years, they remained rare, edible festivity. Because when resources are scarce, pleasure concentrates into moments. Today cannoli fill glass cases year-round. Yet their origins in immigrant America were humble. Sweets saved for days when life allowed celebration. And after celebration, the new year arrived, bringing with it a dish meant to invite prosperity. Number 16. Lentil soup on New Year's for prosperity. At the turn of the year, in kitchens lit by modest lamps, a pot of lentils simmered. For Italian immigrants, lentils carried symbolism older than memory. Their small, round shape resembled coins, and across Italy they had long represented wealth and renewal. Eating lentils at New Year's promised prosperity in months ahead, a tradition carried faithfully across oceans. Even the poorest families ensured this dish appeared on January 1st. Lentils were practical, inexpensive, nutritious, long-lasting. They cooked into thick soups enriched with garlic, onion, or scraps of pork if available. Bread accompanied them. Olive oil finished them when possible. But beyond taste, the meaning mattered. After a year of labor and uncertainty in a foreign land, immigrants looked toward hope. The ritual of lentils expressed desire for stability, steady work, enough food, better future for children. Serving them connected present struggle to ancestral continuity. Children were told, "Eat, so the year brings fortune." Adults believed quietly, sincerely. American neighbors sometimes noticed the custom with curiosity. But within Italian homes, it remained intimate, a promise spoken through food rather than words. Today, lentils at New Year survive in Italian-American households as heritage practice. Yet their immigrant significance was deeper, prosperity imagined in spoonfuls when reality offered little. Because in early immigrant life, hope needed tangible form, and lentils provided it. And when hope met hunger on ordinary days, even the simplest bread could become feast through scent alone. Number 17. Garlic rub bread, proto-garlic bread. There was bread. There was garlic. There was oil. And from these three, flavor. Garlic rub bread, ancestor of modern garlic bread, emerged naturally in immigrant kitchens where ingredients were few but taste demanded depth. Stale or fresh bread slices were toasted or warmed, then rubbed with raw garlic cloves. A drizzle of olive oil followed when available. The transformation was immediate. Sharp aroma, rich savor, Mediterranean identity restored in seconds. In Italy, similar preparations had long existed: bruschetta in Tuscany, pane all aglio elsewhere. Immigrants recreated them instinctively in America. Bread, staple of every meal, needed enhancement when other foods were scarce. Garlic provided intensity cheaply. For laboring families, this bread functioned as quick nourishment, eaten alone, alongside soup, or with preserved fish. It satisfied hunger between work shifts and stretched meals further. The scent itself mattered. Garlic cooking signaled Italian presence in neighborhoods, sometimes provoking prejudice from outsiders who labeled immigrant districts garlic smelling. Yet within communities, that aroma meant home. Today, garlic bread often appears loaded with butter and cheese. But its immigrant form was austere: bread, garlic, oil, peasant elegance born of necessity. Because when ingredients are few, flavor must come from skill. And while bread absorbed garlic's sharpness, another preserved fish added depth to countless meals beside it. Number 18. Sardines packed in oil or salt. In tins stacked in cupboards. In barrels at markets. There were fish that lasted. Sardines. Like anchovies, sardines traveled well preserved in oil or salt, making them ideal protein for immigrant households without refrigeration. Larger and meatier than anchovies, they provided more substantial nourishment at low cost. Italian immigrants incorporated sardines into daily eating with ease. Mashed onto bread with garlic and oil, added to pasta, or eaten directly from tins, they offered calories, fat, and flavor essential for hard labor diets. Their preservation echoed Mediterranean tradition. Coastal Italian communities had long relied on cured fish for inland transport and winter storage. Immigrants found familiar products in American import shops, maintaining continuity of taste. For families struggling financially, sardines represented efficiency. Long shelf life, strong nutrition, minimal preparation. Children learned to eat them young. Adults valued their strength-giving properties. The oily richness complemented bread-heavy meals, balancing macronutrients instinctively before such science existed. American mainstream culture often viewed sardines as humble or pungent. Yet for Italians, they were neither luxury nor embarrassment, simply reliable sustenance. Today sardines are rediscovered as health food, praised for omega-3s and sustainability. But in immigrant kitchens, they were already prized, small fish carrying big nourishment across oceans. Because survival cooking values durability and flavor that endures. And in the same kitchens where fish preserved the sea. Another humble flour from chickpeas recreated street foods of southern Italy. Number 19. Chickpea porridge and panel traditions. In southern Italian memory, there was a food made not from wheat, but from chickpeas. For immigrants from Sicily and parts of southern Italy, chickpea flour held deep culinary roots. Wheat had often been scarce or expensive in their home regions, and chickpeas offered a hearty, reliable alternative. Ground into flour, cooked into porridge or formed into cakes, it became sustenance for the poor. In America, this tradition continued quietly. Chickpea flour appeared in Italian import shops or was made by grinding dried legumes at home. Mixed with water and salt, it was cooked slowly into thick porridge, smooth, earthy filling. Sometimes spread onto surfaces to cool and cut into slabs. Sometimes fried into simple fritters resembling Sicilian panel. These foods required minimal ingredients yet delivered protein and calories essential for laboring families. They also preserved a regional identity often overshadowed by more famous Italian dishes. Sicilian immigrants in particular recognized the taste instantly. Street foods of Palermo reborn in tenement kitchens. To American outsiders, such preparation seemed unusual. Bread from beans? Cakes without wheat? But for immigrants, chickpea dishes symbolized ingenuity born of scarcity, transforming humble legumes into satisfying meals. Today, chickpea-based foods have returned in global cuisine as gluten-free or plant-based alternatives. But in immigrant America, they were never substitutes. They were originals, Ancient Mediterranean survival food carried intact across oceans. Because in early immigrant life, grain was not always wheat, and nourishment took many forms. And when even pasta remained from yesterday, it too refused to be wasted. Number 20. Leftover pasta fried in lard or oil. Nothing was thrown away. Not bread, not soup, not even pasta. In immigrant households where food budgets were fragile, yesterday's cooked pasta became tomorrow's meal. Leftover noodles were gathered, sometimes mixed with egg or cheese scraps, then reheated in pans with lard or oil until edges crisped and centers warmed. The result was entirely new. Golden, slightly crunchy, intensely savory. This practice echoed Italian cucina povera, the peasant tradition of transforming leftovers into fresh dishes. In Italy, pasta frittata or reheated pasta had long existed. Immigrants reproduced it instinctively in America, where refrigeration was limited and waste unthinkable. Children often enjoyed fried pasta as snack. Workers ate it quickly before shifts. The caramelized starch provided satisfying texture absent from boiled noodles. Even small quantities stretched further when reborn this way. American observers sometimes found the idea odd. Pasta, once cooked, was expected to be eaten immediately in Anglo-American cooking norms. But Italians saw potential in every remainder. Today, fried pasta appears occasionally in modern cuisine as novelty or fusion. Yet its immigrant roots lie in necessity, reclaiming nourishment from what remained. Because in kitchens of scarcity, yesterday still had value. And alongside reheated pasta, vegetables themselves became vessels for stretching meat and bread. Number 21. Stuffed vegetables with bread fillings. A pepper could feed many. So could an onion, or a zucchini, or a tomato. Italian immigrants brought with them a tradition of stuffing vegetables not with abundance, but with ingenuity. Bread crumbs, herbs, garlic, perhaps tiny bits of meat or cheese, these fillings transformed modest produce into substantial dishes. In America, vegetables from street markets or pushcarts were affordable compared to meat. So households hollowed them carefully, saving every piece. The interiors mixed with stale bread soaked in water or milk, seasoned, and returned inside before baking. The result looked generous though ingredients were few. Stuffed vegetables embody culinary stretching, a small quantity of costly items dispersed through larger plant matter. Flavor remained, portions multiplied. Regional styles persisted: Sicilian stuffed peppers, Neapolitan onions, Central Italian zucchini. Immigrant neighborhoods blended these methods, sharing techniques across origins. To American eyes, these dishes appeared elaborate, but they were born from thrift, not luxury. Bread, ever present, acted as extender, binder, sustainer. Today, stuffed vegetables appear in Mediterranean restaurants as classic fare. Yet in immigrant kitchens, they were practical artistry, transforming scraps into centerpiece meals. Because creativity often grows from constraint. And when animals were slaughtered, constraint demanded every part be preserved, even blood and liver. Number 22. Organ sausage, blood or liver sausage. In rural Italy, nothing from an animal was wasted. Blood, liver, fat, scraps, all became food. This philosophy traveled with immigrants into American cities, where slaughterhouses and butcher shops offered offal cheaply or even freely to those willing to use it. Italian families transformed these parts into sausages, blood mixed with grains and spices, liver chopped with fat and herbs, stuffed into casings. Techniques varied by region, but purpose remained constant: preservation and nourishment. Making such sausage in America required adaptation. Space was limited, equipment improvised. Yet during colder months, families still gathered to prepare batches, sometimes collectively. Sausages hung near windows or cool rooms to cure briefly before cooking. For immigrants, organ sausage represented continuity of peasant wisdom, respect for animal life through total use. It also delivered concentrated nutrition, iron, protein, fat, vital for labor-intensive lives. American mainstream culture often recoiled from these foods, labeling them coarse or unsanitary. But within Italian communities, they were respected tradition. Recipes passed orally, guarded carefully. Today, blood and liver sausages survive mainly in heritage cuisine or specialty markets. Yet their immigrant role was essential, maximizing value from minimal resources. Because survival meant honoring every edible part. And alongside meat preserved this way, ancient grains from old Europe simmered into soups of endurance. Number 23. Barley or farro soups from old grains. Before wheat dominated, there were older grains. Barley, farro, spelt. Many Italian immigrants came from regions where these ancient cereals had long sustained rural diets. Hearty, adaptable, and filling, they formed the base of soups cooked slowly with beans, vegetables, or bones. In America, wheat flour was abundant, but old habits persisted. Italian markets imported familiar grains, and families prepared them, as they had for generations. Barley soups thickened into hearty stews, farro softened into nutty porridge-like dishes. These grains offered several advantages: long storage, high nutrition, deep satiety. For laborers burning calories in factories and construction, such foods provided lasting energy. Compared to refined bread alone, grain soup sustained longer. American cuisine of the time rarely featured these cereals, making them markers of Italian identity. Their textures and flavors signaled Old World continuity in New World surroundings. Today, farro and barley are celebrated in health-conscious diets and artisanal cooking. Yet in immigrant kitchens, they were never trend, simply ancestral staple. Because across oceans, some seeds traveled in memory. And when grapes were crushed for wine, even their remnants found new life and sweetness. Number 24. Grape must desserts from winemaking leftovers. After grapes were pressed, after juice flowed into barrels, there remained something thick and sweet. Must crush grape pulp and juice before fermentation. In Italy, families had long cooked this byproduct into puddings or jellies, ensuring nothing from harvest was wasted. Immigrants who made wine in American basements revived the same practice. Once the best juice was siphoned for fermentation, leftover must still contain sugars and flavor. Heated slowly with flour or semolina, it thickened into dark, fragrant desserts. Sometimes nuts or spices joined if available. The result was modest sweetness, rare treat from otherwise utilitarian process. Children especially cherished these moments. Winemaking season brought not only wine, but dessert, something uncommon in daily immigrant diets. This practice illustrated peasant efficiency, byproducts transformed into nourishment. It also tied sweet flavor to communal labor and seasonal rhythm. Today, such must-based desserts survive mainly in rural Italian traditions. Yet in immigrant America, they were celebration carved from necessity. Because even in scarcity, sweetness could be created from remnants. And when sweetness was unavailable, there remained one baked good designed to last through weeks of uncertainty. Number 25. Hard biscotti for long storage. In cupboards where food might run low, there were biscuits that did not spoil. Biscotti, twice baked, dry, durable, suited immigrant life perfectly. Made from flour, sugar, eggs when possible, and baked until crisp, they resisted mold and staleness. Weeks could pass, they remained edible. Italian immigrants baked them in batches when ingredients allowed, storing them in tins or cloth. They served as snack, breakfast with coffee, or emergency food when fresh bread ran out. Their hardness was intentional. Drying ensured longevity without refrigeration. Dipping into wine or milk softened them, another echo of Italian habit. Compared to soft pastries, biscotti required fewer perishable ingredients. Nuts or flavorings were optional, plain versions common among poorer households. Yet even simple biscotti offered comfort, sweetness that endured. American neighbors gradually adopted them through Italian bakeries, eventually associating biscotti with coffee culture. But in immigrant homes, they were practicality, baked security against hunger. Because in uncertain economies, food that lasted meant safety. And together, from polenta to biscotti, these foods told the story of a people who crossed oceans carrying recipes of survival and transformed them into the foundation of Italian-American life. As the last crumbs of biscotti are counted, the final steam of polenta rises from a well-worn pot, we pause to reflect. These foods, humble, resourceful, resilient, were never merely meals. They were memory made edible. They were the echo of villages across oceans, the taste of homes left behind, the comfort that bound families together in unfamiliar streets and crowded tenements. Italian immigrants did not simply bring ingredients. They carried tradition, creativity, and endurance in every pot, pan, and loaf. From the bitter greens foraged in city lots, to salted cod eaten by candlelight on holy nights, to wine quietly fermenting in hidden basements, each dish tells a story. A story of labor, of adaptation, of laughter and sorrow, of hope folded into simple sustenance. And in tasting them, one can sense not only what fed bodies, but what nourished hearts and preserved culture. Today, many of these foods have crossed beyond immigrant neighborhoods into the broader American palate. Polenta sits on restaurant menus, cannoli line pastry cases, pizza defines streets. Yet their origins remain quietly heroic, the ingenuity of families who, in scarcity, made feasts, who, in foreign lands, recreated home, who, with every meal, stitched together the threads of life and memory into something enduring. At the World Tapestry, we celebrate these stories, the flavors that shaped a community, the rituals that survived migration, the ordinary meals that became extraordinary markers of identity. History is not only in books, it is in the simmering pot, the fragrant bread, the bite of a salted fish, and the shared table that defied time and distance. If this journey through kitchens of the past has stirred your curiosity, carried you across oceans, or reminded you of the enduring power of food and family, subscribe to the World Tapestry. Explore with us as we uncover the threads of memory, culture, and resilience that connect our shared human story, one flavor, one life at a time. Because in every dish lies a history, and in every history lies a world worth remembering.